month in Exploring Wine Regions, we're going to be covering the wines of Valpolicella. Valpolicella is in a region of northern Italy, right by Verona in the Veneto region. So Valpolicella has a few other major important regions for wine located nearby, including Lugano, Bardolino, Valdige, and Soave. But we're going to be really focusing just on the wines of Valpolicella and specifically Valpolicella Classico. So what makes these wines so special? First, let's start with the climate. So here we are pretty far inland from the Adriatic Sea. So we're actually kind of in a middle point between the Adriatic and the Alps, right by Verona. So you get an interesting interplay of climates coming in from the Adriatic, as well as cool air coming down from the Alps. All of this being moderated by a very large lake here called Lake Garda. So you get this very hot continental climate at times, which will then sometimes get blasts of cool air coming down from the Alps, as well as some warm and humid air coming in from Lake Garda, producing a lot of different diurnal shifts and lots of different microclimates as the area is very hilly. Now, talking about the soil from this region, you also get a lot of complexity in the different soil types. So the area has mostly calcareous soils, but it does have basalt, it has some volcanic soils, you can get clay as well, depending on the subregions. Valpolicella specifically tends to be primarily those calcareous soils, which do help with acidity in the wines, and it helps retain the moisture. Now, getting into the specific microclimates of Valpolicella and Valpolicella Classico, you're going to be in a very hilly area, and the Classico region actually is split up into 5 valleys that face the Adige River. So these 5 valleys create high points and low points, and the high points are where the best vineyards tend to be, because those are areas that are a little bit more cool and they do get a lot of sunlight, as well as being able to drain additional water that's coming in from the rain or any of the humidity or fog that might be coming in from those hot air blasts coming in from the Adriatic Sea. So in the Classico region, you have the 5 fingers where most of the most important houses like Masi, Tomasi, Del Forno, Quintarelli are located. Now, in those areas, you get mostly those, as I mentioned, calcareous soils, but on a few of the vineyards in the northern part, you do get some of those volcanic or basalt granitic soils. When you get into the main area for Valpolicella, where the majority of the production is actually Valpolicella Rosso, you will get much more mixtures of different soil types, and the hills are much lower, and instead of being only oriented towards the river, they do change a little bit in their orientation. So the airflow coming down from the Alps or coming up from the river does tend to change the way it's affected. Here, they're not getting as much moisture because the hills go against the airflow coming up the river, but they still get, because they're in line with the Alps, that cooling air. So you get much more change in day and night, and you're able to get much more acidity, which is why this is the region that produces the highest quality wines. Here you still get very nice, very charming wines that will have nice warmth, but still will retain a little bit more acidity. Generally, they'll have slightly lower alcohols than what you get in the Classico region because they reach their full ripeness so much quicker. Now, talking a little bit about the grapes from the region, this is where some people might say Italian wines might get confusing because there's many different local indigenous varietals allowed to be grown in Valpolicella. So the most important grape to know is Corvina. Corvina is the majority of the plantings and is considered the highest quality grape for the region. But by law, you cannot make most of the wines here from 100% Corvina, and because you're getting all these different microclimates and you want to have a little bit more complexity in your wine, you'll end up blending in a lot of the other varietals. So if you turn around a bottle of Amarone or Valpolicella, you might see names like Corvinone, Ossoleta, Rondinella on the label. There's a few other even smaller varietals that are allowed, like Corvinone, and you will find those almost always as a small percentage of blends. Occasionally you'll find 100% Corvinas, which are excellent, but it's very rare to find these other varietals planted anywhere else in Italy or as 100% varietal wine. Now, when you're in Valpolicella, you have a couple of different quality levels. First quality level, which is your entry tier, will just be your Valpolicella Rosso, which is your red wine from Valpolicella. This can be made from a blend of those varietals with a high percentage of Corvina, and these are often starting at the $8 price point, going all the way up to hundreds of dollars depending on the quality and the producer. Very nice, easy drinking wines on those entry tiers, but they can go to very high quality, age-worthy and cellar-worthy wines on par with wines like the high quality wines of Bordeaux. Then you move into what they call ripasso wines. Ripasso wines are wines that are passed through juice from the grapes that they use to make Amarone. So as I mentioned in one of our clips on social media, when you go to make Amarone, you dry the grapes before producing the wine. Well, when you dry the grapes and you crush them, you'll get all that free run juice and you'll make Amarone. But because these grapes are dry and still have so much more flavor and they don't actually extract it all, they'll get some of the wine that they would normally make Valpolicella Rosso, and they'll pass it through these grapes that you use to make Amarone to get some more of those flavors that are actually locked inside those grapes. So they'll actually let it macerate, or they'll just pass it through there, which is why you get the term ripasso. Then the highest quality of the wines is going into the Amarones. So the Amarones start off as traditional winemaking in the vineyard. You have your grape bunches, you usually choose your best plots, your best vineyards, and you give it the most attention and manicuring because you'll hand harvest, you'll take care of all your wines to the best of your ability to make your Amarone. What makes it more different, as I mentioned before, is you actually will dry the grapes. And when you dry these grapes for at least 70 days, the grapes will not only raisinate, which will lose water, but retain all the sugars, retain all the acidity, retain all those elements that maintain the flavor. But a lot of those different elements that create the flavors in wine will begin to change shape and will begin to polymerize and turn into different flavor components. So by drying the grapes, you're not just concentrating the flavor, but you're also changing the flavor and enhancing the flavor. Then from there, you go to a more traditional winemaking process. But when you dry the grapes and you go to make the wine, you'll lose 30 to 40% of the total production just by drying it, which does make better wine, but you are making a lot less of it, which is why wines Amarone are typically more expensive than your typical wines from other regions. So this has just been a little bit of the information for you to know about Valpolicella. The best way to explore Valpolicella is in a glass, so make sure you use the coupon code that we have for this month to be able to begin your exploration of this region.